Good evening. My name is Andy Smith. I'm the acting chair of tonight's meeting. Welcome to the October 21st meeting of the City of Charleston Design Review Board. Members of the board president are Ashley Jackrell, Jeff Johnson, Lucas Boyd, and Ben Whitener. Members of staff, city staff president are David Meeks, Brad Thomas, DRB staff, and Patrick Carlson of the city clerk's office. No board members are accused from any of the projects today. No agenda items have been deferred today from today's meeting. There have been no public comments submitted. The order of the meeting will be as follows: introduction of the project and context overview by city staff, project presentation by the applicant. Generally, we ask that these be limited to 10 minutes. An additional 10 minutes may be requested by the applicant and granted by the board. All presenters are to clearly state their name for the record. Persons affiliated with the project, designers, owners, developers, consultants, etc., should speak at this time. We'll then move into board questions. Any public comments at the meeting, 10-minute time limit. The applicant does not get to respond at this time. Please clearly state your name if you're making a comment for the record. City staff recommendations. We will then allow the applicant to respond or clarify the public comments and city staff comments. 5-minute time limit on this. Then we ask the applicant to please take a seat. We will then enter board discussion. The applicant may clarify inaccurate information when recognized by the chairman, but otherwise may only speak if asked a question by the board. We will then have a board motion and second, and any further discussion by the board and a vote. We ask that you please turn off all mobile phones and other devices that may make noise at this time. Comments from the public are to be limited to site design and architecture of the buildings only. The board does not have authority over zoning issues such as land use, buildings density, flooding, or traffic. With that read, we will move into our applications for this evening. First application is 2068 Sam Renberg Boulevard. Request approval of final draft of the Citadel Mall design guideline for future development. David.
Thanks, Tony. You can step right up. Just have a couple of context slides showing the location of the mall. I think most everybody knows where this is. 2068 Sam Rittenberg. This is just a closer view of the mall, and then as we go forward, they have some more context as well. Step right up.
Thank you. My name is Tony Giuliani with Dolphy and Sonia. I just want to point out a few things. We do not have an identified project at this time. This is just the design guidelines. PUD was approved in 2019, and these are the design guidelines that were the requirement of the PUD. Can you go to the next slide, please? And I would also like to ask for additional time. All right. Yeah, so the agenda, can you just, next slide, please? I'm going to introduce the team. We have from Singerman is Adam Greenbaum. From DMA is John Bruda. UDA is Eric Ost. Scott Parker with DWG, and Chris Cook with ADC, and also Nicole Smith with Maynard Nexton. So next slide, please. And yeah, these are the steps that we follow. Like I said, step one was getting the PUD approved back in 2019. Part of that PUD was getting the design guidelines to be approved by that. In 2023, the master plan by Tori Gallup was approved, and step 3 was the design guidelines. We started that approximately a year ago. We've met with the city a number of times. I'm thinking it was very helpful. Now we're at this point, we're at step 4, which is the design guidelines. And that's before you today. I hope you all had a chance to read it. Because we're just, the direction, which Eric and Scott will talk about more in detail further on. Like I said, we're hoping to start projects in 2025, but right now there is no identify projects at this time. Next slide, please. And as you can see, the PUD was approved. Next. Yeah, this is the content of the guidelines for which you'll find within the design guidelines. Next. And then I'll turn it over to Aaron.
Thanks, Tony. Good afternoon. My name is Eric Goff with Urban Design Associates. I would just like to say, when it comes to inspiration, there's a lot in Charleston to be inspired by. Here at Urban Design Associates, we work all around the country, working in various different cities, and we're incredibly impressed by Charleston. I'd like to just kind of show you the next slide here. We could advance it. I mean, there's so many. One of the things that we see in cities is there's always a great, public cities generally in the downtowns. They tend to have a really great public realm, but not a great private realm. Go to the suburbs and outside the cities, you oftentimes find a great private realm and not a great public realm. And one of the things about Charleston that's so remarkable is it has an incredible public realm and private realm. And so the landscape of the gardens just animate the streets in such a dramatic way. And so here's obviously some imagery that we love from Charleston. Obviously, one of those images is right across the street. But also I'll point you to the center image is Broad Street. Broad Street's a great commercial street. It's your signature street. That particular block, one of the things that is interesting is it doesn't actually work terrific for pedestrians and for the retail environments to kind of spill out into the public realm. So we were taking a lot of the elements of Charleston and thinking about that moving forward, but there were also some things that we were considering of how we can create guidelines for this particular place. Next slide. Obviously, this is in West. In the next slide, you'll see some images. Maybe not that bottom left. That's right across the street. Also, but the other images are West Ashley, which we obviously has an incredible presence of landscape and opportunities at times to have a lot more outdoor seating and some things that we wanted to make sure this was a place for both West Ashley, but also reflects your region. Next slide. So this is the Citadel Mall today. This has nothing of what we just talked about. Obviously, it's a 1980s, 1970s retail model, specifically designed for shopping entirely. It opens, it doesn't have a public space. It opens at a certain time and then closes at another time, and then it doesn't handle stormwater. It certainly doesn't support a healthy environment whatsoever. So we wanted to think about how do we consider the uses that are still there, and how do we provide a new environment that's much more supportive and much more demonstrates a much better planning and put this all together in an incredible new recipe for a great place. Next slide. So, next slide, sorry. And looking at our vision, we first created our kind of organizational principles, the things that were going to kind of help us operate through this process. A great pedestrian environment, thinking about sustainability, strengthening those existing tenants, and then also creating something that's very much regional and very much also a strong mix of uses, not just really strictly about retailing, but a real place in a new downtown and Main Street. Next slide. So these next images are showing you what we believe this place will start to come to look like, and part of these design guidelines is to help provide the tools to do it. So you can see here that we've got a street that is going to have pedestrian shading, a place to dwell, a new living room for West Ashley, but also that presence of landscape and regionally appropriate architecture. Next slide. In this slide, you'll start to see, in this next slide, you'll start to see some of the characteristics of that architecture. It's not specifically about any style, but about performance criteria that makes it feel regional. Shutters and shading, transparency at the ground level, but also this kind of intermittent relationship of gardens and landscape and street and urbanism coming together for a very walkable environment. Next slide. And the centerpiece is a kind of public plaza, a public space that could be a very engaging place for people to really be creating the living room for West Ashley, and a place that could be served for events, pop-up vendors, and so forth on any individual days. But also the place would be completely open and transparent, supporting this mix of uses around it. Next slide. So in the next slide, the design guidelines are set up for basically, it has 7 chapters. The first chapter is really the introduction and the design vision, setting together how to use the design guidelines and getting people set up for working, the architects and landscape architects to kind of set them up for the process of going through the guidelines to support their projects and providing that inspiration. Next slide. Chapter 2 is specifically focused on the public realm. And I know it's a little bit of a small diagram, but that image on the left you can see it identifies the places in the plan for a very interesting walk. Great cities like Charleston have a very interesting experience as you move through them, the sense of compression and expansion, different characters of spaces as you walk through them, so they're a joy to walk through at all times. As you can see, all those little green shapes are various different configurations and lengths and widths and so forth. And that was very deliberate, so we created a very interesting walking experience all the way through the plan. The one on the far left is stormwater management, very natural environment, going all the way to the kind of middle of the image on the top right, which is our plaza, which is a very urban environment. So it's interesting to kind of go from one environment to another. So it's going to be very much representing all the characteristics of West Ashley and the landscape story that goes all the way through it. Scott will walk you through next. So also great cities also have a variety of environments along the street, which are really the fabric of this new plan. The dark red is our major streets that circulate through the plan. Oranges are supportive streets, and the pink are pedestrian muses, which also have function a little bit, feel like very public spaces and in and of themselves. We have 3 different street types that work through this particular component of the site. This particular, another component about great Main Street environments is having buildings that sit up on the street. So you can, I want to point you point out that dark purple line. If you look at Main Street along Broad Street, all the buildings and commercial buildings really kind of hug that edge. So we have a 0 setback along there to create a very distinctive public realm, but then there's these breaks. And as you turn the corner into other areas, it allows for it to open and much more flexibility to the architects and designers. So you get a variety of experiences you turn off of the main street. Next slide. And then chapter 3 is really focused on architectural design guidelines and the various building types that will be present here, and the kind of key elements that are going to be part of all of the buildings that are going to be participating in this great new environment. Next slide. One of the characteristics about Charleston and a lot of older cities is that sometimes you have city blocks that are made up of a lot of different individual buildings. And today, it's building paradigms, oftentimes you have much bigger buildings. So these guidelines also articulate breaking those buildings down into separate volumes to create a much more supportive pedestrian and walkable environment of a better scale. So not necessarily that these are different styles in this area, so it's not necessarily pastiche in any way, but really kind of making sure that it introduces those scalar elements, and then items like recommended bay spacing or types of bays that architects could take advantage of in articulating those massings. And last, we also provided a whole series of different typologies for sun shading devices, for retail environments, for transparency at the ground level, and create so that this is a place that has a lot of variety and a very interesting place to walk through with various different inspirations, but at the same time doesn't have a series of all repetition and one move all the way through it. Next slide. Last, we have the materials palette. This is a palette of high quality materials that architects can use in their buildings, so it spells it out very clearly for future commissions.
We have about 10 minutes left on the.
10 minutes, thank you. I won't take that long, but I could. So my name is Scott Parker with DesignWorks. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the landscape guidelines. And so the guidelines for the landscape are really about creating a timeless place that's grounded in traditions of Charleston. And that's one of the wonderful things about landscape is you can do that. It's always consistent. And so we're choosing to be very true to our region. The plantings will be predominantly native plantings. We're going to focus on shade, which is so important in our climate, and really focus on using the landscape to create a great public realm, which will really be the center place of the new Citadel Mall. So these are a few of the guidelines that talk about planting. With regard to hardscape, same thing, we're going to rely on traditional Charleston materials. We think that it's really important to be timeless, and we have a really great palette in Charleston, and we want to be true to that. With regard to furnishings, we think that is a place where we can perhaps go a little more modern or a little more contemporary, and they can change over time. So we're not going to be traditional all the way across the board. The next set of guidelines, go to the next slide, please, is dealing with signage. And so the signage guidelines are really intended to be inspirational. It's really about creating a great, lively, cohesive shopping environment. And signage is very important to that. I will say that the size of the signage and the area and so forth are all governed by the city zoning ordinance. So we're not proposing to change any of those basic rules. The last set of guidelines deal with lighting, which is also, next slide, please. Actually, back on the signage, you can see very specific about where signs can occur within the buildings, as well as within the public realm. And then again, some really good images of the types of signage that we would like for the designers to incorporate when they work here. Next section, next slide. Dealing with lighting. So lighting is obviously very important, especially in a shopping environment. Certainly in the public realm, we want to encourage people coming here in the evening. The lighting will be very scaled to pedestrians. We'll use LED, very efficient fixtures. The lighting will obviously focus on safety. Will also be dark sky compliant, which we think is very important. And lastly, it's really about lighting the public realm and not lighting the buildings. So not a lot of focus on that. Next slide, please. So this is where we wrap it up. And this really talks about the process associated with the guidelines. And so hopefully we'll get the guidelines approved this evening. And then a project will come before the internal design review board that's set up by the Epic Center. Clearly, it will go through a three-step process, just like you do with the DRB. We also will be approved and go through approval process with the Property Owners Association there. And then lastly, we will come before the TRC for the city of Charleston. And that's where everything will get bogged down. No, just kidding.
You said.
All right,
we
with
did.
that, we're done. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. So any questions from the board?
A couple. Let's see. First question is right on that page, and I think you clarified it. The actual document on page 70 says that it comes back to the city DRB, but it looks like here that that's been changed to city TRC. Is that right?
That's
Okay.
right.
Good. Page 35, I don't know, and I don't know if we have the actual document, David, that you can refer to, but I'll try to call it out.
It would take a moment.
It's fine. I can question. Ask a question. On the page. Big document. I actually read the things. I live half a mile from here, so you can imagine I wanted to read this. 3.5.5, it says matching strategy for mid to high rise buildings. Is it really considered a 25-story maximum height? Are we considering that height? Yes, no, maybe.
I mean, it's in the PUD, but I mean, that's just part of the zoning regulations
The zoning allows 25 stories there.
in that area, but I mean,
Okay.
nothing's planned.
I think that's kind of, if it's in the PD, I think that's kind of out of our.
No, I was just curious. Is 25-story? Just a question. Page 24 was a question. Let's see, it's where it says small format retail or food and beverage. It's encouraging the parapet height greater than 18 feet. I was just curious, so it lends to looking like 2 stories. But it doesn't say that actually has to be an occupied story. So is it, you thinking that maybe there's like faux windows or something on the height? Is that the idea?
And that there'd be nice grand storefronts with transom so that it has that more of that scale of maybe it's 2-story, but not actually looking like a 2-story necessarily, but just kind of encouraging buildings of scale to kind of hold. The street's very wide there, so we want to make sure that buildings that are kind of good scale.
Okay. And so you specifically reference sections in the zoning ordinance from the city. I guess this is a kind of a question for us too. If the zoning ordinance changes and they amend it, does it come back to us, or is that just, can they do that?
I'm gonna have to look into that,
Or-
I'm not sure.
Or do we have to reference the specific zoning ordinance section? Can we just reference what it is?
And to piggyback off of that, my question was actually related to, there's one place where it says that you're gonna follow the city guidelines as of today. And then there's other places, to Ben's point, where zoning ordinances are called out, like for driveways and signage and things like that, but don't necessarily stipulate it's as of today. So as we anticipate those zoning guidelines changing, would those be frozen in time as exhibits or addendums to this piece? Or is that going to be something that you link back to the city?
Because it's a PUD, we already have the zoning, so we would be the ones requesting the zoning. The city couldn't change our zoning. We would have to
Yeah, but
request
if you're referencing the ordinance
Yeah,
You reference the city zoning.
and the ordinance changes,
Right, I get, yeah, that's the intent is, are we gonna change if they change, or are we trying to lock in the zoning ordinances in effect as of today?
and that's not really a necessarily this board question, but I think it's more of a thing we need clarified. Because this is the last time, I mean, I don't think it's,
It's not coming back to us.
Yeah. or somebody needs to clarify it. It's not necessarily,
This could be in place for a long time, so we would probably anticipate that as you update it, we could just send people to the most updated would make a lot of sense, and it would be a reasonable direction to go.
I think it's addressed in the PUD actually, and I just don't have the PUD in front of me to confirm what the language is.
Okay.
But we're happy to follow up and, yeah, send out an email or.
having written zoning documents, sometimes you do want to say, as of today, right now, today, this is what it is, and sometimes you want to flow with the changing times, so
Maybe we can have it both ways.
that's between you. That's not, once again, I don't think that's a this board question necessarily.
But it's ambiguous right now.
Yes.
That's your
For
point.
sure, yeah.
So
The only place I think
needs
it's specifically called out as of the approval date of these guidelines is section 2.6 driveways. The rest of them, it seems to allude that they would reference back to the zoning ordinance as it might be updated in the future. So if we are gonna lock in 2.6 driveways, that would be something for us to potentially address in a motion.
Yeah, okay, we can talk about it more in discussion. All right, Ben, good. Additional questions?
I have a couple thoughts, questions. It's a question, not a thought. First of all, this is a really good looking document. This is an exciting transformation to the Citadel Mall. This would be wonderful. Question from Eric. Eric, you did a great job of kind of talking about the great things that Charleston has to offer in terms of its historic fabric. And you did a good job, I think, of sharing those photographs in this presentation. The challenge, I just question why we didn't put any of those in the actual guideline document. The question is, could there be more specific architectural examples from Charleston that's more representative of what we're trying to replicate in Charleston in this document?
That's a great question. And certainly we thought about that a lot and we had a lot of discussion about that. One thing that we wanted to make sure is that we recognize that we're also in West Ashley. And we also want to make sure that we're referencing those kind of characteristics of Charleston, but at the same time, putting something that's very specific for this particular place that can be, that architects can use and maybe creatively understand those relationships without saying that we want to, and I think maybe, your question is an excellent one, and we wrestle with this a lot. And one thing that we want to make sure is also that people don't necessarily misunderstand that we want you to do that exact building here. Yeah, so we wanted to kind of show some things. So we kind of intentionally used a very soft line look to these and just kind of try to help. Maybe most importantly, I think what we want to make sure is that, you know, this is building a great stage set for a great new Main Street environment so that people can do this, but that the specifics of the architecture being replicating something else is needed. I mean, your point's an excellent question, and you know, we'd be certainly open to introducing more photographs if that's something you feel very strongly about.
Well, I know that designers design, and sometimes designers look for things to design.
Yeah.
And the document can be just that. So I want to be careful about what images we present to lead folks in maybe straight direction.
Good question. Yeah.
Yeah, that was not a question, that was more of a statement.
Okay.
Yeah. I guess the question would be just, how does the design guideline presented here speak to your presentation about it mimicking the things in Charleston?
We believe that it references those things. I mean, even the pattern of the street and the architecture of you know, architecture garden, and then trying to make sure that we're creating that kind of interconnectedness for the interior and exterior along the retail. It's really hard in some cases, though. We really had to make sure we knocked our eyes out of folks because there technically is not really a great Main Street environment in Charleston itself, and certainly not, maybe not even, I think, one in the region that's exactly like this one. So we had to make sure we were kind of taking advantage of those things. And I think most of it is actually not necessarily very literal in the architecture, but really making it a place that people really want to be outside and want to be in the shade. So I think that's really the big picture elements that we were making sure come through there is, like, you know, showing storefronts that open up and lots of shading and things like that, so that we can get that opportunity. And even we showed some rooftop occupiable spaces in the retail. There's not much of that in Charleston. However, there's porch life up there. So it's how do we kind of bring those elements into this new retail environment? Really kind of, it's a difficult thing to put together. And so I think, you know, that's maybe where we were kind of headed in that one.
Sure. Where would you say most of the examples that are shown here are from?
Of the photographs?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, they're from the region, all from the south. Yeah, mostly from the south. But they really are, and you made a good point. As we certainly, if you feel like it's important to have Charleston images, but we want to make sure is that these were maybe some of them were very more style neutral in the region, so that they also didn't necessarily literally try to pick up on Charleston itself. So.
Sure. Okay. Thanks.
Sure.
Any additional comments, questions? Hearing none.
I have one other
Okay.
question or thought relative to the this board. Has this board seen this document before?
Yeah.
No, okay, but they've met with staff many times to kind of help shape and guide. Okay.
Any additional?
Yes, sir.
Well, you know, sitting here tonight, so. Hearing none, we will move into public comment. Yes, ma'am. Please.
Thank you. Jackie Morfess, I'm a community advocate. This is my neighborhood and it's beautiful. Thank you. I do want to speak on topic. I have been in communication with the Citadel Mall, Dillard's department store, and Bell's department store for almost 2 years, both at the managerial level and corporate level, for disability access. There are those of us who physically cannot open the door to a store. Dillard's does not even have a disability button. Bell's has one and it's been broken for over a year. There are those of us who can't enter restaurants, banks, beautiful spaces and places. We don't have access. If we can't even get in the building, nothing else really matters. We're really never part of the conversation. There are 2-story buildings without elevators. We're concerned with the aesthetics and the beauty, but we're not always thinking of the communities in Charleston that are physically unable to access entrance. Please remember us. Managers and staff don't want to come and open the door. Other customers get annoyed if you say, "Can you please hold it for me?" Please remember us.
Thank you, ma'am. Any additional public comments? Okay. With that recommendation.
Thank you, Amy. The staff has had a few meetings with the applicant to review the drafts of the Citadel Mall design guidelines and has given some input to its development. The guidelines are similar in form and quality to the Magnolia design guidelines that the board approved a few years back. Staff found the guidelines to be comprehensive, easy to follow, and well thought out. We support the material within. The design principles are appropriate for this area of West Ashley, and the document appears to be guiding future development that would be an attraction and a vibrant destination for the entire Charleston area. We recommend approval for the design guidelines.
Thank you, David. Applicant response to anything? We will move into more discussion and a motion.
Well, again, I love this, this idea, the concept is good, and I really appreciate your witness there about how, architecture needs to be accessible and our communities need to be accessible. I'm an architect, that's always good to hear. But with regards to this, plan, I'm excited about what it might bring. I think horizontally, the spaces are designed very interestingly. I love the idea of compression release. I think from a site plan perspective, this is amazing. I don't know how my colleagues up here feel, but the architecture of Charleston is so unique in the world. Why in the world would we tell people to look elsewhere to inform our public fabric, our building fabric? It just blows my mind that there's not a single reference in here to a Charleston building. The horizontal spaces look great. It's what happens when it's articulated. I know it's a minor thing. Designers will design. Good designers are going to take this and say, yes, I get it. I get the shutters and the shade and the fabric that you're trying to get. But not everybody's a great designer. And they're going to be looking for specific examples. And when I look through this document, I don't see a single one that's from Charleston. Kiwanis came here a few years ago and said, we ought to be exporting architecture. And it looks like we're importing architecture in this document. And should it reflect, maybe not 90%, maybe not 100%, but some percentage, should we not recognize that our architecture is worth replicating? I would advocate that we take another revision here and add even some of those images that we had on the presentation that I don't think are in the document, I might be wrong, to start not acknowledging that we have something of value in our own backyard. Front yard. And that we begin to export architecture here and not say we rely on our Southeast brothers and sisters. We have something of value right here that's worth keeping and replicating.
In relation to the specifics of the document, would you be talking more imageries?
It's more imagery.
Or do you think,
It's,
do you have an issue with the spirit of the architecture that the words are trying to, in the kind of?
no, I think the language and the concept presented are accurate. When you look at the images, and I think they start on page 20 in the 20s, there's a whole section for, let's go back to that.
Yeah, like architectural character by building thing.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, because I think one of the strengths of the document is that it's not stylistically prescriptive or genre specific, right?
Agree with that.
It's just promoting nice, public, really thoughtful buildings. And so how do you balance that with explicit photography of downtown Charleston, right?
Always a challenge.
Always a challenge.
And the problem is we don't really have the context of Peninsula Charleston and West Ashley. I mean, I live half a mile from this site. There is no context really.
But to create a context when you go to Charlotte,
Do we copy downtown there?
think
I don't
that's
know.
what
I'm torn. I would be torn. I think the key is the urban planning moves that they're making. And I think those are spectacular. I wish they could go further. I wish you could buy the, what's it called? The South Park Plaza next to it. And, you know, a lot of things break down that are outside of y'all's purview that some of the streets, main streets and sidewalks, you know, I live a half mile from that site, but I'm still gonna have to drive to the site. You know, it's not really set up for pedestrians and bikers. It's just not. And I agree that, you know, imagery is important. And I don't recognize most of the images in here. But I feel like if this were closer to Charleston, maybe even, you know, downtown, you know, Peninsular, I totally get your point, Jeff, but this West Ashley area, there's nothing, no context around it. That's why we have a challenge sometimes, you know, with all the car washes that we see. What's the context? You know, and we have a challenge because we're looking at stuff that's brought in as a prototype, Riverstone from Colorado or somewhere.
Yeah.
It's not contextual.
But I think,
I guess, oh, go ahead.
I think what you're saying is, they're gonna have images in there, right?
yeah, right.
So just reference some that are,
Some, and there are some, and I misspoke, there are some that are Charleston, but not a lot.
Just a handful.
Yeah.
Cigar Factory, Jasper. But then that comes back to, do we want to be downtown? Or like we've done with some of our other projects, do we want to give the design team some latitude?
Right, and that, as designers, we often have buildings we're building out of context or have no context. And what do we do when we're looking for inspiration for that thing? We look for precedents. And what are those precedents that we look for? And that's what this is. This is really just precedents. I would just like to see one more layer.
Okay.
And maybe it's not important. Like I said, designers will take the words and not necessarily lean on the pictures.
what I don't want to see
But
is
some-
a bunch of commercial buildings that are trying to be single houses again.
Yes.
In West Ashley, you know, everybody thinks they solved the problem with a single house. I'm okay. I'd be fine with adding some more inspirational images, especially if the architects that are going to be involved, and we don't know who they are, but if they're coming from somewhere other than Charleston, that'd be helpful. I think it's a fantastic document. You know, there were some questions in there, but maybe they are some 25-story things. I don't know. I don't know if that really works in that location. I would, this is just minor. I wouldn't, I'm not gonna put in a motion or anything, but definitely check some of your grammar and verb tense agreements, stuff like that. It just, there's a lot of places that just caught my eye that need to be reviewed. Yeah, and other things that they're minor, you referenced an 8 foot tall screening fence. I wish it was 6 foot or, about that height for more residential. But that's not a deal breaker. I just feel like 8 foot's, pretty high for such a,
Well, I would think about that and just, as we're dealing with commercial, commercial oriented things, dumpsters,
yeah, I get it.
storage,
I
that
get
sort
it.
of thing.
Things get high as fences, that's all. We're having pedestrian feeling streets. And I would just, the height of the parapet, 18 feet, I would just try to discourage anything that references back to like how Mount Pleasant did the town center, with the faux windows, it doesn't work. Make them big openings, that show that that's what it was meant to be. And you referenced some of that in here with the big curtain wall storefront glazing. But I'm 100% behind this. I've gone to Citadel Mall a lot. I still go because there's a baseball card shop there that I like to go to. But this is awesome. This would be spectacular.
Great improvement.
Great improvement.
Well, here's an example in the text. It says office buildings in the CMEC should be designed to reflect the simplicity and scale of former light industrial building types found in Charleston's working waterfronts. Page 26. If you go to page 26, there's not a single picture of what that is. So
The
what,
text is in, right, in these things, the text, and they do reference the area a lot in the text, but
Yeah.
Well,
if I'm from Seattle, I'm saying, well, I don't know.
gotta go
Maybe
Google,
that's
I
what
guess.
these are. I don't know.
Do you add them as to part of take out some of the existing ones that they have and replace them with images, or do you do a whole
Well, I don't know.
appendix of Charleston images that are successful ways?
Maybe, and you just replace them. If it's
Just
important
replace
enough
the
in
existing.
Word, then you find images that support the word. I don't know. People from all over the world come to visit Charleston
100%, yeah,
for architecture and history.
but they don't go visit West Ashley. I'm just saying, I live there, I know.
Well, I would say that at a point they did,
Yeah,
a long time ago.
yeah.
Before there were
I'm-
buildings like this.
Well, unfortunately, I went to the grand opening of this mall.
I'm good with that.
But I mean, I defer to you that, I mean, it would be nice to have some examples, but I don't know that it's, I think the overall scope of the document is, I think there is some refinement that y'all can take into advisement. But I don't personally see holding up the document. Unless the board.
I'll do them.
And it could go to staff level too,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
That's what I was
It could be
gonna ask.
approved at just staff level.
Yeah, I mean, I think we can make comment.
Yeah.
Ask David to make sure these refinements are made.
We'll do
And
that.
that this allows
Let's do
y'all to
that.
move forward down the process.
I'd like to make a motion.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'd like to make a motion for approval of the design guidelines with board comment to study adding more imagery related to the text in the document of the local Charleston region.
Then would you also consider a board comment regarding the zoning references?
Good point. Yes. How do you want to say that, actually?
Clarify.
Clarify the sections that are referenced in the document to the zoning ordinance. Okay.
Okay, we have a motion for approval of the design guidelines with board comments to study adding more imagery to support the text of the Charleston vernacular, architectural vernacular fabric. And for the applicant to clarify the zoning references in the document. Do we have a second?
Second.
Actually seconds, so we'll take vote. Jeff,
Aye, favor.
Lucas,
Yes, in favor.
and I am yes in favor. The motion passes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good work. Fun stuff.
Buy more property so you can make that whole area.
Final item on the agenda this evening is approval of minutes of the October 7th meeting.
Any motion for approval of the minutes?
There you go.
Jeff makes the motion. We have a second.
Second. Oh.
Roll, Ashley.
Was everybody else there at that meeting?
We were,
So,
we were.
I know, but we need a forum.
I'll approve.
Oh.
Lucas,
Let me baby.
I'm yes in favor. I have no thoughts, so. Motion passes. Yes,
Yeah.
Happy Rain was there.
That's funny.